There's been a lot of buzz recently in the Apex leaker community about a Revenant rework that is supposedly just around the corner. But what if I told you the story seeds for this rebirth were planted way back in Season 14? What's up, you guys? I'm not amazing, I'm just mediocre, and we're here today to break down the lore behind Revenant Reborn. Now, Revenant does have a long and sordid backstory, but I'm going to do my best to give you all a quick recap. Before he was turned into a simulacrum, he was a human assassin named Caleb Cross that lived 300 years ago. And after his brutal death, his body was recovered by Hammond Robotics for use in their experimental simulacrum program. This technology would see human brains piloting robotic bodies, but the test subjects would suffer psychotic breaks unless programmed to perceive themselves as still flesh and blood human beings. And Caleb Cross was the first consciousness to accept this programming, making him the first simulacrum ever created. However, these developers warned that each respawn would deteriorate his programming, and eventually the cumulative damage might cause a complete failure of the system. This fateful failure of Revenant's programming wouldn't happen until 300 years later, while he was on the mission where he assassinated Loba's parents. Damage to his robotic frame combined with centuries of degradation to his programming led to the breaking of Revenant's psyche, where he finally saw his true robotic form for the very first time. Not only that, but Revenant could also remember every single time he had died over the past 300 years, and would remember every subsequent death to come. This would cause Revenant to develop a sort of existential nihilism where after centuries of repeated deaths, nothing mattered anymore, so he filled his days with the suffering of others. That is, until Loba came along. Loba, whose parents were assassinated in front of her eyes by Revenant when she was just a child, had spent years seeking her revenge, and finally found a way to gain access to Revenant's source code, the still living head of Caleb Cross stored deep beneath the battlefield of Kings Canyon. Even though that chance to end Revenant slipped through her fingers the first time, she was still the only one to get even remotely close to putting a stop to this assassin bot. So far from wanting to put a stop to Loba, Revenant actually wanted to assist her because a still functioning part of his original programming prevented him from being able to destroy that source code himself. So he's basically required to get outside assistance if he ever wants to put an end to this immortality. So Loba ends up getting the new location of Revenant's source code from Hammond Robotics after recovering the head of Ash for them, which had apparently been lost in an alternate dimension. But fast forward to Season 7, and we are at the source code's new location, the floating city of Olympus. And it's here, the same place where Revenant assassinated her parents, that Loba exacts her revenge. Loba tells Revenant that she did recover his source code, but actually tossed it through one of the phase runners on Olympus, sending it all the way to the planet Gridiron, the home world of the IMC. That way, his source code was so far out of reach that he would never be able to recover it, and was thus doomed to a life of eternal torment. After this, Revenant became even more of a recluse than ever before, choosing to hide away in the darkness and only occasionally poking his head out to cause suffering to those around him. However, this story would all change in Season 14. You see, alongside Loba's heirloom event, we also got some comics released on Twitter, and through a flashback, it was revealed that Loba never actually sent Revenant's source code through that phase runner to Gridiron. She actually entrusted her best friend Jamie with this task while she distracted Revenant by confronting him face to face. Jamie, however, did not believe this path of revenge was what was best for Loba, so he decided to lie to her, tell her that he threw it through the portal, but actually kept the source code for himself and hid it away. This decision would eventually catch up with Jamie when he was found near death after a brutal attack where Revenant's source code was actually stolen from him. In the epilogue for the Season 14 storyline Friends Like These, we see a text message discussion between two individuals with the initials Z and A. Well, I'm not exactly sure who A could be. I do believe I know that Z is likely a man named Zhao, an agent for Mr. Silva, who we saw before aiding in the capture of Mad Maggie back before the beginning of Season 13. If you remember the teaser for Season 13 where two space fighters were dogfighting just above Storm Point at the beginning of the match, he was the guy piloting the ship that actually shot down Mad Maggie's. So if my theory is correct that this Z from the Season 14 epilogue is the same as this Zhao character who works for Mr. Silva, that means Silva Pharmaceuticals has had possession of Revenant's source code since just about the end of Season 14. Now keep in mind that Revenant knows nothing about these developments, still believing his source code to be so far out of reach he could never possibly recover it, and as a result, he's essentially become depressed. This is confirmed by a Season 16 loading screen, which appears to be a psychological analysis of Caleb Cross, aka Revenant. This report states that the subject has suffered nearly 300, quote, terminations in the last year, and deems that roughly 80% of them were preventable. They further note that Revenant actively halted any countermeasures that would have prevented his termination, and surmise the probable cause is his unlimited recall of every termination that's ever occurred to him, leading to what they call a, quote, existential despair. And finally, we have the most important piece of the Revenant Rebirth puzzle here at the end, with the strong recommendation that we begin research into the Organic Storage Elasticity Project immediately. While it isn't exactly clear what this project is intended to accomplish, the rumors of Revenant Reborn coming just around the corner lead me to believe it's an attempt to reprogram Revenant's consciousness back to its original state. The loading screen this report is attached to shows Mr. Silva in front of a myriad of screens, and in the background you can see an image of Revenant with a list of units recovered and units destroyed. And if these numbers are to be believed, then Revenant has a little more than 10,000 units remaining. At its current rate of consumption, Revenant would be out of bodies in about 30 to 40 years. However, if Silva is able to reprogram Revenant back to his original state, then he would once again believe himself to be a flesh and bone human being named Caleb Cross. And if he truly believes himself to be human, he would struggle much harder to preserve his own life, thereby preserving each of his few remaining units and potentially extending his usefulness to the Syndicate by even more centuries than he's already lived. I shared this theory over on the Apex lore subreddit, and user Jump Drive Set came back with their own potential theory. Jump Drive suggests that the program could possibly be a way of making Revenant catch up with modern simulacrums by having an internal source code as opposed to an external one. If you didn't know, the source code of a simulacrum is the preserved brain and nervous system of the former living human subject, and most modern simulacrums actually have this built right inside the robotic chassis. And as stated earlier, Revenant's programming prevents him from harming his own source code. So by putting it inside his own chassis, it may stop his suicidal tendencies without having to change his appearance or personality. Now granted, a lot of this is speculation and we honestly have no idea what they're going to do, but I am really excited to see what happens with this Revenant rework. What do you think? Are we going to get a return of the persona of Caleb Cross, or are we just simply going to get a refurbished Revenant who's catching up with 300 years of technology that he missed out on? Let me know what you think down in the comments section below. And if you missed out on learning some of the backstory of our Season 17 legend, August Ballistic Brinkman, then make sure you click the video you see on the screen right now. Hope to see you all there. In the meantime, I'm not amazing, I'm just mediocre, and I'm out.